Hello, welcome everyone to this session on the Ziauddin Dialogues. I am your host, Sayed Muaz Shah. I'm the director at the Center for Human Rights. And this program is co-hosted with the PR and Communications Department under Amr Sirzad, whose initiative this was to bring ZU Dialogues to the public. ZU Dialogues is a series of interactive panel discussions started under Professor Dr. Pirzada Qasim, the former Vice Chancellor of Ziauddin University. Renowned personalities and analysts are invited to give their valuable expert opinion on different aspects of social, political, cultural, and socio-economic topics, as well as to conclude discussions with some good constructive ideas and suggestions, particularly for the youth of this country. The purpose of this activity is to educate our youth for the betterment and prosperity of Pakistan. Furthermore, interest and involvement of students also improve many of their skills, such as research, knowledge, public speaking, listening, debating, critical thinking, and leadership qualities. Today, we have a very special episode on the 74th anniversary of the creation of Pakistan, particularly related to the date of August 11th, when e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah did a presidential address to the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan that was etched in history forever. During this speech, he said some of his most famous words, and I quote, "You are free. You are free to go to your temples. You are free to go to your mosques or to any other place or worship in this state of Pakistan. You may belong to any religion or caste or creed that has nothing to do with the business of the state." These words, revolutionary then as they are now, have continued to set ablaze conversations amongst Pakistanis today. What were the significance of these words? In what context were they given? Was there more to this message, or just freedom of religion was indicated in this new fledgling state? Today, we will explore that and much more with our esteemed panelists. We are joined by Mr. Peter Jacobs. Mr. Peter Jacobs is a human rights professional, researcher, freelance journalist. Uh, he's a trainer. He currently works as the executive director for Social Justice, a Pakistan based research and advocacy organization. He is the chairperson for uh, he is the chairperson uh, for the People's Commission of Minority Rights and members of South Asian Forum for the Freedom of Religion and Belief working group. He contributes regularly to newspapers. Also, he's been associated with several national and international human rights organizations since 1988 in different capacities, including Amnesty International and many other INGOs, including the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, HRCP. He worked for the Justice and Peace Commission, Assistant and Acting Executive Secretary, National Commission for Justice and Peace as its Executive Director. And currently, he has a special interest focused on the rights of minorities and women in labor. And he writes extensively on minority issues in Pakistan and abroad. Thank you so much, Mr. Peter Jacobs, for joining us.
Thank you
Uh,
so much, Mas.
I'm glad that you could as well. We're also joined today by Dr. Sayed Jafar Ahmed, who's a professor and dean currently at Suhail University. He's an author, a researcher, and a social activist. He's currently working as director for the Institute of Historical and Social Research. Um, uh, Dr. Jafar has served as a director for Pakistan Study Center at the University of Karachi. And to his credits, 6 books have been published. He also has compiled 20 other books on history and politics and literature. And one of his books is known as Federalism in Pakistan, a Constitutional Study. Another is Pakistan Historical Legacies and Contemporary Issues. Dr. Ahmed has participated and presented the papers in numerous international and national conferences, and he's delivered these lectures and conducted seminars internationally from Singapore to Sri Lanka and a famous ship called the Peace Boat. And he regularly works with civil society organizations on the issues of peace and human rights. Dr. Ahmed's persistent efforts devoted to the cause of enlightenment in the society for promoting the modern and progressive vision of Pakistan have placed him amongst the most elite leaders of education as we have in this country. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Jaffer. So as we begin, Dr. Jaffer, I would like to start with you. Um, can we get some of this historical context of when this speech was made, who it was made to, what were the words when Qaid-e-Azam said this? Who was he addressing? I mean, you mentioned, it's mentioned that it was a presidential address to a constituent assembly, a young body that was filled with the leaders of this new young fledgling nation to try to design a new constitution. Was it only directed to them? Was it for the general public? I'd like you to give us the historical context of these words, and perhaps we can then better frame the conversation.
Thank you very much. I'll begin by saying that we know that uh, as a political platform, Muslim separatism had started soon after the British control in India took place. In 1906, Muslim League was formed. In 1913, Qaid-e-Azam Jinnah joined Muslim League. At that time, he was in Congress, and he joined Muslim League on the condition that he would continue his membership of Congress as well. So till 1920, Jinnah Sahab was a member of both Muslim League and Congress. Now, in the 1920s, he offered certain solutions for the communal issue of India. Unfortunately, they were not accepted by Congress. He was prepared to even give up separate electorates for the Muslims. The reason for which Muslim League was formed in 1906, Jinnah Sahab in 1927 offered to give up separate electorate if the Muslims' position is improved in constituent bodies and the number of Muslim majority provinces were increased. So I see that from 1913 till 1946, Jinnah Sahab offered a number of, solutions for the communal issue of India because he believed that if some solution is found out in the all India context, that would be more useful. He was not bent upon partition, but when it became inevitable in 1946, then he agreed to it, and partition plan came, and he endorsed that. He came to Pakistan on 7th August, and on 11th August, he spoke to the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan. The session was chaired initially by a Hindu member, and then Qaid-e-Azam was elected as the president, and he delivered his famous speech. That was 11th August. And 3 days later, he had to take oath of the Governor General of Pakistan. Now, what is the historical importance of this speech? I would say that Jinnah Sahab was delivering this speech in four capacities. He was the founder of the nation. Without him, nobody could have thought that Pakistan would come into being. Secondly, he was the president of All India Muslim League, the organization that had led this movement and that had eventually reached the culminating point of creating of the new country. He was chosen. He was named as the future Governor General, and as I mentioned, that 3 days later he had to take oath of the Governor General. And now he was elected as the President of the Constituent Assembly, so the four caps were there on his head. The speech itself is a historical document, and I keep on saying in my speeches and seminars that this is Magna Carta of Pakistan. Because in this speech, we often pick 4 or 5 sentences from here, or 3 or 4 sentences from there. But if you read the full speech, you will find 3 major things in it. First of all, there are certain immediate things of concern. Violence had started. Jinnah Sahib referred to it. He talked about nepotism. He talked about sort of what should be the duty of the government, law and order. He also referred to black marketing, and these were the things he talked about in the beginning. But then he gave his point of view why at all partition took place. And this is very important. People quote Jinnah Saab's speeches of the past, people quote his speeches of the later days after 11th August. But in this speech, for the first time, we see the summing up of what he thought had happened in India. And while doing so, he gave his vision of future Pakistan. The main crux of this speech was this, that why India partitioned. And there he said that India got partitioned. We reached this point because there was an issue of majority and minority. And not only the issue of majority and minority, what Jinnah Sahib thought, and he used the word angularities of minority and majority, what he was trying to convey was that in India there was likelihood of a majority becoming permanent political majority, and there was a possibility of a cultural minority becoming a permanent political minority. And if communities are divided along cultural lines, and those cultural lines are natural, but if those cultural lines transform into political demarcations and political divisions, and if those divisions become permanent, then we cannot think of one nation. So he said that in India we could not become one nation because all our efforts to resolve this angularity of majority community and minority community went away, and no positive response was given to this. Now he comes to Pakistan and he says that we have two examples before us. There is an example of India where we failed to build a nation because of this minority majority issue. On the other hand, we have example of Great Britain where there had been this division of Catholics and Protestants, and they resolved this issue. And how they resolved it? They resolved it by ensuring that the state would become neutral and the state would treat their citizens equally. And he said that, well, this is the solution for Pakistan. And then, as you mentioned in your in the beginning, that you're free to go to your temples, you're free to go to your mosques, etc., etc. What he was trying to say was that in the eyes of the laws of the state, the citizens would be equal. And not only this, there was a great message in it. What I want to emphasize here is that Jinnah Sahib was saying that we should give up the idea, the very idea of minority and majority. If it is going to be one nation, there, we should get away with the notion of majority and minority. All citizens are equal, they should be treated equally. If they have their religious differences or their ethnic differences or their cultural differences, it's a different matter. But as a political community, they should be one, and there shouldn't be minority or majority in this national community. So I would say that Jinnah's vision of Pakistan was a vision of modern democratic state for which he thought that parliament is necessary and parliament should be sovereign. In this very speech, for which I think that Jinnah Sahib wouldn't have taken more than half an hour, in this brief speech, he talks about the parliament sovereignty three times. Three times he refers to this parliament and the legislature as the sovereign body of the country. So I think the message is quite clear. In the and he before giving this message, he explains the historical background why we reach this point.
That's extremely very poignant, and it brings up the conversation where you spoke about divide between the different communities. And actually, if you read this quote in that context, he gives a lot of reference to Europe and what happened there and what's happened throughout history. So we can see that Jinnah is also very well versed in the social dynamics and some of the social issues that human society has progressed through with the divisions along ethnic lines, along racial lines, along religious lines, and he wanted to clarify these certain points. So, with that said, I want to actually, speaking about this divide, and you mentioned how there was actually the chairperson for this constituent assembly was a non-Muslim of this first session, and within that, which I find very quite interesting, is that when you spoke about the Pakistan movement in the beginning and how that came to formation, in the beginning, it was because the Muslims in India were not getting their democratic rights in the vision of what Jinnah was going through in those early years of the 1900s. But when we speak about now that Pakistan is created, Pakistan movement had caused this kind of outcome to had come to foray. But amongst the Muslim League, now we had members from other communities who were now part of this new demarcated area of Pakistan, who now had joined the Constituent Assembly, though they were never part of the Pakistan movement. And with the majority of them, with 10 some odd members, actually, they were not even part of the Muslim League. So this kind of was an interesting introduction, maybe a really first time official meet between these non-Pakistan, what we can say, Muslim League members. So I would like Peter Jacobs to kind of shed that light. Now, these members have come in. This is probably their first gathering together. They were in Congress, but because now the lines are drawn in the sand by the British and it's split the country, they, of course, were residing over here and they joined with that. Maybe you could shed light on that and how influential that's this speech and these words may have been in this first session for them, who originally did not were not part of the Muslim League.
Thank you so much, Sayyid Masha, and thank you so much for Dr. Jaffer for giving this expose and background of the speech made by Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Well, one significant change that had happened was in the form of, you see, the members, the Hindu members mainly in East Bengal, who had been elected on the ticket of Indian National Congress. They changed their identity as National Party. So that was one significant change, and they were part of this constituent assembly which was being addressed. Secondly, I think it would not be it would be unfair to ignore the presence of people uh, like Jogendranath Mandal, who were, even though not part of the Muslim League as such, but a room had been created under Jinnah's leadership that non-Muslims could become affiliates or associate members. So people who had voted in Punjab Legislative Council in favor of Pakistan and partition, they were also, though not the members, but they were in the audience. So he was, addressing a diversity of stakeholders and interest holders who, of course, were beyond the members in presence. And he was addressing to the whole world. That's why I would just like to see it from the angle of policy framework. I think Jinnah's speech was also presenting a comprehensive policy framework for the country. So when he speaks about governance in particular and the ills that had, corrupted the society in the form of parochial approaches and malpractices, that he was stressing, even he was addressing the issue of nepotism and corruption as well. So I would say that you see broadly this policy framework had been forgotten, and an alternative narrative and policy framework was evolved through the decades for country of Pakistan, which did not subscribe to the vision of a democratic state per se, but it was more into a religious state. So that is why you see an imposed identity on the citizens of Pakistan was perpetuated time and again in the form of excluding people from the realm of Islam to defining the religion of people like Article 26 260 does in the Constitution of Pakistan. That was again in a way effort was made to dismantle this the whole construction of identity for the state as well as the citizens in 2009 when the federal government of Pakistan People's Party decided to celebrate 11th of August in connection with Qaed's vision as Minorities Day. So as 11th of August approaches every year, these discussions are at least illuminated, enlightened, and I think it's a blessing that we are considering Qaed's vision now seriously, more seriously than we did before.
I appreciate the insight for that, particularly the details where you mentioned about some of the members of this session that they were affiliates with the Muslim League, and this is not just the Muslim League, but there were other people that were present in this. And I want to just kind of move forward slightly a little bit because these were the first few days of the Constituent Assembly, and this is where I'll ask Professor Jafar Ahmed to shed some light in. During August 11th was one session, and then in August 15th, there was another session in which Mountbatten had flew in and was addressing the assembly for the first time. And it's very interesting the words he chose in his speech, and I would like you to kind of shed light because it's on this same theme. Perhaps he was influenced and he heard what Jinnah had spoken earlier, and he gave reference to the great emperor Akbar. And he said that this Pakistan and this leadership of Pakistan and, highly kind of reference to Akbar the Great. What was very interesting, and I found that quite particular, is that Jinnah in his response said, and I quote Jinnah, the tolerance and goodwill that the great Emperor Akbar showed to all non Muslims is not of recent origin. It dated back 13 centuries ago when our Prophet, not only by the words, but by deed, treated the Jews and Christians handsomely after he had conquered them. He showed them the utmost tolerance and regard and respect for their faiths and beliefs. The whole history of Muslims, wherever they ruled, is replete with those humane and great principles which should be followed and practiced by us. So I find it quite interesting is that here Mountbatten has given reference, and it seems as if like Qaid is trying to clarify that reference to Akbar the Great, knowing that Akbar the Great and the historical context is sometimes controversial and more conservative Muslim eyes. Was that the case, or was he just kind of shedding further light in what he had spoken on August 11th? Perhaps you can give us some more
Um,
on that.
well, I would say that there is no contradiction in the two positions. Qaid-e-Azam didn't say that your reference to Akbar is wrong. He simply says that he was not the first who showed this attitude of tolerance and attitude of bringing communities together. And then he traces the tradition of this, cordiality in history and goes back to Holy Prophet. And Jinnah Sahib time and again referred to Islam and the values of Islam. And he was someone who simultaneously with this kept on saying that Pakistan would not be a theocracy. So it means that he was not talking in terms of a theocratic state, which is the objective of certain quarters in our country since independence. Jinnah Saab's concept of Pakistan was modern, democratic, liberal, progressive country, which would treat its citizens on equal grounds. And in doing so, the principles of Islam would be invoked. and principles of Islam of equality and brotherhood and kindness and all those principles. So Jinnah Sahib believed in Islam's principles, but he was not someone who thought that Islam is a engineering manual which had given you some particular model for the form of government. I mean, you could adopt any political model suitable to you. And he referred to a parliamentary system, as I mentioned in my earlier presentation. Before partition, he referred to the examples of Canada and Australia. He said that Pakistan would be a federation in that tradition. So I think that there is no conflict between the two statements Jinnah Sahib made. Of course, he was talking whatever he was trying to do. He was invoking the cultural idioms. He was invoking the cultural identities of the Muslims. First, in order to construct the Muslims as a distinct community, and then asking for this community the right of national self-determination. In his 1940 resolution speech, and the day before that, on 22nd March, he delivered a long speech in which he talked about the right of national self-determination, and he said that all nations in India should be given this right, and we are asking this right for the Muslims. So he was saying everything in political context, right? Now, when Pakistan came into being, you just see of four governors of the country, three were Christians. Of the three commanders in chief of different forces, all the three were Christian. The law minister of Pakistan was a Hindu, and it was, had he continued, it would be the same law minister who would have presented the constitutional bill in the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan. But Jinnah Sahib died 13 months after the creation of the country, and when this objectives resolution came, even the law minister left the government and he left the country also. So I would say that Jinnah Sahib was quite clear in what he was trying to do. There was no ambiguity in his approach. He wanted to use Islamic principles and transform them, translate them in modern institutions. And certainly he was not going to make it a theocratic state.
Thank you, Dr. Jaffer, on adding that light. And of course, we see that in reference. I actually came across a recent statement that's kind of related to this topic from Sheikh Hasina. I'm not too sure if you heard recently. She said, constitutionally, Bangladesh is a secular state, and Islam is the state religion. To many, this may seem contradictory. However, Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has repeatedly stated that the Bangladeshi secularism is inspired by the Medina Charter, a 7th century document considered by many as the constitution of the first Muslim body state politic founded by Prophet Muhammad. Now, taking that and in context to some of the words that she's used, she's actually again very similarly as Dr. Jaffer had highlighted. Jinnah just gave reference to something that was earlier, and this is just something of a similar inspiration. So we find that Sheikh Hasina has also kind of dipped back, and we see currently in the current politic, Imran Khan constantly referred to Riyasat-e-Medina. As a member of the minority in this minority community, when you hear these words associated with Islam or rooted in Islam, is there some sort of I want to say sincere belief? Because this is an honest question I think a lot of Pakistanis have, and we'd love to have the minorities and hear from the minorities and their perspective. That when you hear these things, oh, but they're basing it back again on the words of their prophet or back to this Medina Charter. How significant is that, and should it be in that context or outside of that context, as Jinnah had actually given in the August 11th speech? Mr. Jacobs, I'd like you to shed some light on that.
In fact, you see, Uh, um, the internet connection is not working as good, but please let me know if you can't hear me. Please just let me know.
Right. No, we can
Uh,
hear you. We can hear you.
Great. Um, well, one thing that I learned from my elders, by the way, my uncle, my maternal uncle, was part of the delegation which represented Christians of Punjab. He was representative of Lailpur, the district, and then he was part of delegation that appeared before the Boundary Commission to request them to count Christian population among the Muslims, so that Gurdaspur and other districts could benefit from it and they could be part of Pakistan. Now, what have I have learned from the elders of Christian community is that somehow Qaid-e-Azam was a leader that people wanted to believe in. He had those credentials of reaching out and presenting a vision. So he had that popularity. One. Now this question is raised time and again, that why the three Christian members in Punjab Legislative Council, why were they inclined to support Muslim League over the other groups, the other opinion? And why did they do so without any conditionalities attached to it or any agreement written or whatsoever form? Now, I've tried to venture into this question and found out that somehow the Christians in Pakistan, because of that common areas with Islam, one, two, because culturally also, you see, the missionaries as they came, they were promoting Persian and Urdu, and somehow the Punjabi lot of Christians here, they were culturally they felt a kind of affinity with Muslim community. And the third reason, of course, was that Muslims were marginalized, and so were Christians, most of them, and they thought that with the Muslims in Pakistan, they will have better protection of their rights. That was at least that was the impression. That was the kind of dream that they were following. So somehow they could feel kind of affinity with Islam as compared to other religions, and that's why that's one thing. So now you see a major part of minority population in Punjab forming the Christian population mattered then and now. Uh, but still, you see, as the treatment has changed, the relationship has changed, dynamics, social dynamics, cultural have changed. Um, uh, Now, of course, there is a kind of resentment, maybe similar to other groups, social groups and sectarian groups who are persecuted in a way and in a bad position. That's why that, so for some time at least, you could see leading the Christians community leading the movements on social rights and human and political rights, particularly in 92, the movement against the inclusion of column for religion in the national identity card that was led by mainly Christian lot. But again, it was joined by a lot of Hindu politicians besides the civil society of Pakistan against the system of separate electorate in the country. And that's how you got rid of separate electorate in Pakistan in 2002. So looking through the lens of various movements, social and political, which have been there, I would like to say that whereas we stand divided because of that state policy of creating minorities and minoritization of minorities and majority, I would say, because then ultimately it is not the number that matters, it is the psyche that the citizens carry. So whereas the law discriminated among the citizens on the basis of religion, it divided the society thoroughly, and it minoritized even the citizens belonging to majority religion somehow carry that minority psyche. So the question of minority and majority has, become a central, I must say, in the polity of Pakistan. Challenges, studying the challenges as well as finding a way forward.
No, I definitely appreciate that. And
Actually,
Sayed,
if
Professor, please go ahead.
yeah, if you allow me,
Yes, yes,
I mean,
please.
you refer to Sheikh Hasina Wajid's statement, who said that secularism is there in Bangladesh and it doesn't conflict with our concept of Islam. I may mention that within the intelligentsia and within the scholarship, there is a point of view that secularism is inbuilt in Islam. And so much so that a Marxist like Professor Hamza Alvi interpreted the Misaki Medina as a document which was essentially a secular document. And he said, and we may look into the text of Misaki Medina ourselves, what it stood for. I mean, it was a contract between different tribes, including the Jewish tribes, and all of them had agreed to accept the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, as the arbiter who was there that in case there are differences among the tribes, he was taken as the arbiter and the final word.
Mm,
So the Misaki Medina, in a way, brought about a community which had common political grounds to be on the same page. And Dr. Hamidullah has written in his book that when the Ghazwa Khandak took place, the Jews of Medina also joined the effort, and they provided facilitated the digging of that trench or Khandak. So I would say that it depends at the end of the day. What is your concept of Islam? If your concept of Islam is inclusive, and if you are going to accept different communities at par with you, then of course it will be a modern concept. This was the concept of Allama Iqbal. This was the concept of e-Azam of the Jinnah. And they were not pitted against secularism as such. I may mention that in 1938, when Mustafa Kemal Atatürk died, you just see what Qaid-e-Azam said. He sort of gave a statement in which he said that today the Muslim world has lost its greatest leader of the times. And he asked all the units of Muslim League in all the districts to celebrate the Ataturk Day. And Ataturk Day was celebrated by all the units of Muslim League. So it depends on what you think of what is your perception of Islam. As far as Qaid-e-Azam was concerned, his concept was Islam was inclusive, it was modernist, it included all the segments of the society, and it was not sort of sectarian, and it was not strictly, following one or the other school of thought. And he was not going to make it a theocracy. Uh, and you will find many statements of Qaid-e-Azam suggesting that Pakistan would not be a theocracy.
No, and I'm glad you were able to shed some light. Actually, I was going to come back to this aspect of Misake Medina, and within there, of course, the reference, which is probably the most, I guess you can say, the crux of what you have kind of stated, is they declared everybody was a part of that, including the Jews and the other communities who were non-Muslims in that Medinan charter, as part of one ummah, which is actually quite very interesting because in the charter it refers to them as an ummah. So that is, of course, like you said, it's how we our vision is of that, and to understand that. Now, as Mr. Jacobs kind of highlighted, which I think is very important, is sure, when you're creating this country, Pakistan is coming, Qaid Azam, a charismatic figure, this is something that it can be believed. But when it's not executed on, and like Mr. Jacobs spoke, where the minorities have not seen that vision come to fruition, and there's been a minoritization. Now, albeit I'm giving, being very purely unbiased here, and with removed prejudice, maybe the intention behind these quotas and that was to actually provide accessible democratic rights to the minorities. But sometimes when we pass law, we seem to forget that it might have ulterior effects that the minorities may themselves feel. And we know Marx and Marxist theory. It's exactly around this. He centers his whole philosophy on this idea where the perception is to protect private rights, but in the end, you actually kind of purloin the rights of the more downtrodden as a result of that. Now, in context to that, of course, not only Qaed's speech, but later on, and we've spoken a little bit about the objectives resolution. We note that during the objectives resolution in the same Constituent Assembly, Liaquat Ali Khan, when he introduced it, in his speech, he reiterated these same very principles of freedom and social justice, and he particularly in his speech focused on the non-Muslims and that the non-Muslims. And I'm just going to quote a little quote here. He says, "In our desire to build up an Islamic society, we have not ignored the rights of the non-Muslims. Indeed, it would have been un-Islamic to do so, and we would have been guilty of transgressing the dictates of our religion if we had tried to impinge upon the freedom of minorities." And then he goes on, and there's many parts of his speech where he focuses, again, trying to convince the minorities that, look, we're going to establish this state that is going to protect you and your rights. But it's come to a point, as Mr. Jacobs has kind of illustrated, we've heard these stories. We just say, where have we gone wrong? I mean, and you're seeing the current discussion and political framework politically in Sindh, I would say more so, and elsewhere as well, where now we're getting a lot of bills that are being passed, like the Hindu Marriage Act and the Christian and the inheritance and so forth. Are these efforts to address those misgivings that the minority community may have, are they sufficient or much more needs to be done? I'd like you to shed a little bit of light on that, Professor.
You're asking me?
Yes, yes, yes. And then I'll
Okay.
come to Mr. Jacobs.
Okay, okay. Well, I think that objectives resolution is clearly the antithesis of e-Azam's speech of 11th August. In e-Azam's speech, we see that the very first sentence was, "I cordially thank you with the utmost sincerity for the honor you have conferred upon me, the greatest honor that is possible for the sovereign assembly to confer." A bit later, he says, "The first is the very onerous and responsible task of framing our future constitution of Pakistan, and the second of functioning as a full and complete sovereign body as the federal legislature of Pakistan." Further, he says, "I would like to emphasize is this. Remember that you are now a sovereign legislative body and you have got all the powers." 3 times in this speech, he talks about the parliament as the sovereign body of the country. Now, what the objectives resolution says. Objective resolution does talk about the people, does talk about federation, does talk about democracy. But just see the framing of the words, the manner in which it starts. That whereas sovereignty over the entire universe belongs to Allah Almighty. Now, mind it, congressmen are sitting there, non-Muslims are sitting there in the Constituent Assembly. You are presenting a resolution to them saying that sovereignty over entire universe belongs to Allah Almighty. Their differences start there. And they would take it as something quite against the vision of e-Azam, who talked about the equality of citizens in the country. Now, when you say give one statement which can be accepted by the Muslims, but which cannot be taken or accepted by the non-Muslims, because they don't believe in Almighty Allah. So there comes the difference. And then we see that in order to make it acceptable, a jargon of words is introduced. Allah Almighty, who has sort of transferred his sovereignty to the people of Pakistan, who would exercise it through their elected representatives. These are the words. So you see, the whole political statement is so made that essentially it goes in favor of those who want to make Pakistan a theocratic state, and it is quite in contravention with the views of e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. That is fine. I mean, we see. I mean, just see who is the architect of this resolution. Maulana Shabir Ahmed Usmani and Sir Zafrullah Khan, whose community was later declared non-Muslim after 2 decades and a half. But he was in the committee that drafted that resolution. So you see that it was right in the beginning that we deviated from the views and the perception of Qaeda-Azam, and we see that with the passage of time, the non-Muslims uh, uh, got frustrated with what was happening in the powers corridors of Pakistan, and gradually they felt as if they are marginalized and they dissociated. And as I mentioned, that the law minister left the country, and he gave a statement that he is not satisfied with what has been done in Pakistan. So I think that uh, uh, at occasions like this, we should look back at our history and should see that what had been the objectives of Pakistan. Pakistan had to be a country with big non-Muslim populations. We had something like 17% of our population which was non-Muslim, and had Punjab not been divided, had Bengal not been divided, more than 40% population of Pakistan would have been non-Muslim. So how would you have created a state of so-called Islamic state as prescribed by our religious elite of this country? I mean, Qaid-e-Azam did talk about Islam, but his concept of Islam was inclusive, and he was not going to make it a state where, minorities would be forced separate electorate. You see, in pre-partition India, Muslim League stood for separate electorate for the Muslims. But it did so because Muslims were in minority. After the creation of Pakistan, minorities did not ask for separate electorate. It was the majority or the party claiming to be the representative of the majority, that is Muslim League, that was saying that separate electorate should be given to the minorities. And in 1956 constitution, this was a big issue. And that is why the constitution did not make any decision about the separate or the joint electorates. It was left to the legislature. And we see that in East Pakistan, they made a law for joint electorate, and in West Pakistan, they made it for separate electorate. So, what I'm trying to say is that minorities were excluded from the overall philosophy of the state of Pakistan, and just giving 2 or 3 sentences there or 2 or 3 sentences there, that doesn't fulfill the requirement. If Pakistan has to be a modern democratic state, we should give up this whole idea of minority and majority community. All citizens should be taken equally and should be treated equally.
I just would like to shed some light on that, about the objectives resolution, which I found quite interesting, is that according to Professor Martin Lau, of course, the Muslim League and Congress, they were part of one political party in the sense of British India. and there's a lot of discussion, and even to this day a lot of laws are being exchanged, and Pakistan looks to India how they have handled the law, and it's influential here and vis-a-vis as well over there. Now, one of the things that I found quite interesting, particularly at this earlier stage, is that India too had an objectives resolution, and their objective resolution, as per Dr. Martin Lau, was actually influential in forming the what we call the base of the Pakistan objective resolution. He says if you actually take a critical analysis of it, you will find that a lot of the lines are almost extremely similar to that. And there's a detailed discussion on that, particularly related to fundamental rights and so forth. But what they realized at the end was that if we were to take these same resolution and bring it here, what was the point in splitting the country in the first place, right? And that would became a huge political issue at the time. And so that actually caused a little bit of controversy. And as per Dr. Matlaw, he said it's just my theory that I think at that point they realized that we have to identify certain things that distinguishes the state of Pakistan and its objectives resolution from the objectives resolution in India. So I thought that was quite interesting. And I'm pretty sure, Dr. Jaffer, you may have also come across this kind of similar study and analysis. But I wanted to pull in Peter Jacobs, and you spoke about this minoritization, and I wanted to field you that question as well. Do you feel, and I know of recent events, we've heard this horrendous disaster currently of what happened to the Hindu temple of recent. We've had a few incidents that have led up to this point. There was an attack on Gurdwara as well. And you notice as the communities, the minority communities are facing this, of course, there is some perception that has been built in. But I want to really ask it, the minorities, and when they hear, for example, Imran Khan, he recently tweeted on this, and there's going to be action and so forth. Does the minority community feel that the state is actually trying to improve the situation and trying to do their best, and it is really just a few of these outlying extremists that are doing this, or that the state is indirectly kind of, I wouldn't say participating, but I would say that they're encouraging this type of behavior? Where does the community, the minority community opinion lie? Is the state being sincere, and maybe it's the lack of resources that they're not able to kind of provide that level of protection? If that's the real issue, or is it that there's a lack of sincerity? What's the feeling amongst minorities in respect to this? I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Thank you for this question, which is, about the contemporary situation, basically. I would like to use the lens of this famous landmark judgment delivered by Chief Justice Tasadduq Hussain Jilani in 2014. And my organization, Center for Social Justice, has been following up, not as an applicant alone, but also kind of meeting stakeholders, meeting provincial authorities, and then drawing analysis. Our recent analysis, based on 7 years of performance of federal and provincial governments, has been published under the title of Justice Yet Afar. So 7 years on, at least two governments which have had enough tenures of their government to show performance on the implementation of Jilani judgment. The judgment spoke about, required them to set up a special task force for social and religious harmony, not complied with. They had asked the government to make education of promoting peace, not implemented yet. Then protection of minorities' places of worship, a task force on that, not implemented. Then establishing a National Minorities Commission who would have a say, which would have a say in the policy making, not set up. So those seven, specific orders given, and then more than 60 hearings conducted by the Supreme Court benches. In order to follow up those, in order to have those orders implemented, they issued over 60 over 60 orders. I'm sorry, I said 60 hearings, it was 20 hearings, but 60 orders given. Now, if you look at the implementation, you see a lack of will. There isn't a political will, and not a single meeting of the cabinet has been called or a parliament has discussed uh, this judgment. And we don't see even the strength left with the implementing machinery, which is mainly bureaucracy. They seem to be indifferent. They seem to be very reluctant to implement those orders of the court. This is now Supreme Court. This is not neither constitution, neither nor anything else. Now, what we see, what has built up over the decades is one, first of all, there is statutory discrimination on the basis of religion. And there are certain laws which are instrumentalized by the religious lot here, by the sectarian groups, by the violent groups, I must say, those centers of intolerance against minorities, instrumentalize those laws. For instance, in this recent incident in Rahim Yar Khan, the blasphemy law was instrumentalized initially in order to get people, to attack this mandir. And then now this temple, as Prime Minister has said, this will be rebuilt. I can tell you that in South Asian countries, uh, sometimes the pattern of attacks is similar. For instance, you have mentioned Bangladesh, which had its own challenges. So Bangladesh, India, Pakistan. What you see very readily forthcoming is the rebuilding business. They never try to address the factors behind this intolerance, but they will not listen to, for instance, about at least studying the consequences of blasphemy law. They will not. They will make statement as to, reaffirm their commitment to certain instruments of intolerance, not only blasphemy law, but the education, for instance, the single national curriculum has been, arbitrarily designed and arbitrary. By the way, I was part of this National Curriculum Council, and I've been bringing this up in every meeting that Article 22, one of the Constitution has to be respected. It should be respected. We were forced to take this to the Supreme Court, and now the bench headed by Chief Justice Gulzar Ahmad has called the Federal Ministry of Education to submit their report. Now, with the change of, I think, a bit of composition of the National Curriculum Council, we hope that they are going to pay heed to the demand and command of the Constitution. So somehow, whereas you see dichotomy between Kayed's speech and the objective resolution, by the way, the speech made by Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan was also in contradiction in terms. It contradicted the content of resolution. I would like to say, that, whereas we have also discussed the similarities between the objective resolution passed by Indian Parliament and the Pakistani also. I mean, those political pronouncements sometimes, they are perhaps, using that leeway of, deviating or covering up some of the faults of the situation. They have done so everywhere, but in Pakistan, you see, if we look at, we passed objective resolution, but because we were not able to frame the basics of a constitution till that time. So, I mean, that was a kind of political expediency at that time, which is hanging around our neck like an albatross. I mean, it's a curse that we are been traveling. And look at, you see, the General Ziauddin, he felt himself at liberty to alter the objective resolution also. So he removed this word freely practice of religion when the mention of minorities' rights comes. So luckily we were able to remove. At least that word of free practice. Rulers in this country, they have, arbitrarily and with impunity changed the direction, abrogated constitutions. So that is why the minorities feel that, you see, at least the guarantees which are given in the constitution that we have now has to be practiced. If you allow me, I would like to make one comment about Bangladesh that you made about
Please, please.
in reference to Prime Minister Hasina Wajid's, Prime Minister Hasina Wajid's remark about, the strength being in the old tradition of Mishak Medina. Well, in the southern hemisphere, some of the countries, they're struggling with their political ethos and values that they want to live with, and they were under huge influence or they were being challenged by the kind of religious state which was being proposed or promoted in reaction to extremism that was present in our countries. For instance, Bangladesh is one, but the other one is Maldives. Now, Maldives restricted its citizenship to religion, that is of Islam. They were basically, struggling with political crisis internally, while they wanted to impose stricter laws, basically, and they somehow outlawed their citizens to practice any other religion than Islam. Now, this was an extreme example in modern days of any parliament or any government going about this restriction of citizenship to one religion, and posing a challenge to the concept of equality of citizenship and equality of rights. Now, at the other hand, we see other countries struggling this. For instance, Indonesia was able to stick to its Pancasila, or five principles, which accommodates four religions. But Malaysia, for instance, drifting towards the kind of popular version of exclusionary religion. So they forbid the use of the term Allah by any other, which was ridiculous, basically, because you see, Allah existed and the term and the use existed before Islam.
Absolutely.
And it was
Absolutely.
I mean, I see this in this context, whereas Pakistan is leading in some examples of, this exclusion of people on one ground or the other from the ambit of rights, equality of rights. So I think the struggle is on in Pakistan by civil society in Pakistan. Particularly, I am a great admirer of the colleagues who have, led this struggle right after the independence. They have led this struggle and continuing in the same manner for the respect of human dignity, respect of all rights of all people in the vicinity of Pakistan, in the territory of Pakistan. So I think this is a great reminder that after 74 years, yet we are in the state of struggle, and hopefully we will win this battle in favor of everyone, and to the glory of Pakistan, basically, to the prosperity of Pakistan and democracy in Pakistan.
Oh, those are very kind and powerful words, and I love the reference that you gave, particularly on Article 22. And for those of our listeners, particularly students, Article 22 of the Constitution of Pakistan is part of the fundamental rights, in which they safeguards are put for educational institutions in respect to religions, and each religious community is entitled to their own religious instruction if they wish to do so. So very important. Thank you, Mr. Peter Jacobs, for your kind thoughts. And I think, of course, working on this and this struggle and coming to that, I'd like Dr. Professor Jaffer to give also his final thoughts, and particularly the young people, particularly in the context of what we are facing today. And the challenges. And as Jacob said, sometimes it was expedient for these things, and sometimes there's band-aid bills that perhaps are being passed. But there really is, at the core, something that needs to be fundamentally worked on. What is that the young people who are listening can be a part of to kind of change that, what Mr. Jacobs is indicating, that these are just a bunch of rebuilding exercises. Where is it where we actually can really get into the root of what this issue is, and particularly if it's not going to be in this generation, the next generation that will eventually take this country forward. Some words.
Thank you very much. I would suggest, and I keep on suggesting this thing from different fora, that since I am a student of history, I always emphasize that our youth should go and see the primary sources themselves. They should study history. They should read the text of, for example, Allama Iqbal's 1930 presidential address to the Muslim League. They should read the text of Lahore Resolution of 23rd March, which was approved on 24th March 1940. They should read the speech of e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, delivered in the Constituent Assembly on 11th August 1947, and they should read the text of the Objectives Resolution passed in 1949. I'm pretty sure that our younger generation is so inquisitive and so intelligent that if they read the primary sources and the primary texts themselves, they will be able to determine the fallacies that have been fed to them over the years through the media, through the official syllabi, etc., etc. History should be studied not from the lens of politicians or from the lens of the journalists and columnists. History should be read from the lens of uh, historians or as the students of history. I think that I don't need to give some clue to them or some guideline to them. They are so intelligent that they can themselves figure out what wrongs have been told to them and what is written in the actual text. And that is my message to them, that on 14th August, they spare some time, go and see in some book, or now everything is available on internet. Just read what the speech of e-Azam was. What was he saying? And try to compare it with the objectives resolution and see in what way the notion of sovereignty has been used in the speech of e-Azam, and in what way the notion of sovereignty has been used in the objectives resolution. What was acceptable for all the people of Pakistan, what was more inclusive, and what was not acceptable by all the people of Pakistan, and what was not inclusive. They will make the decision themselves. That is my message.
Thank you so much, Professor Sayed Jafar Ahmed, for your words and your inspirational thoughts for our young people to go out and seek the knowledge themselves from the original sources. I could not have said it any better. And I think that's extremely important to understand where we have come from and to where we need to go. Mr. Jacobs, I did not actually give you the honor of actually giving your final words, but if you would like to kind of pass on final words, particularly to the young people who are watching, and maybe members of the Muslim community, which I think sometimes there is this divide and a lack of communication, and perhaps there's a message that you would like to kind of send them as well, particularly the youth, and how we can actually move forward. And I think those positive vibes that you just kind of just gave, if you could just shed a few words for our young listeners.
Thank you so much, Sayyid Masha. The other day, we were showing a short documentary on Mr. Ayer Rahman, who passed away on 12th of April this year at the age of 91. And The documentary ended on a very, I must say, optimistic note, a very wise one that I would like to repeat for your audience. And he said that it is not fate or destiny of any nation to remain underdeveloped and cursed. Every nation has a potential to rise and take its own destiny in their hands. I think it is the same goes, and he lived, he spent over 50 years in journalism, human rights activism. He was much revered person, more outside Pakistan than he was known very well, but particularly I would have liked that his services was acknowledged by the government. But I must say that his words should always guide us. It is not our fate to remain underprivileged or underdeveloped. We can rise as a nation as honorable, dignified people. And that is the message that I will always carry, and I would advise everyone carries with them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for both our guests who have joined us in this special seminar on the anniversary of the August 11th speech, and of course this month. And for your kind words, especially IR Rahman, who is an inspiration for all human rights activists in Pakistan and what he had done in HRCP and otherwise as well. And I think I couldn't have really finished on a final note better. But when we talk about e-Azam, we often at time cannot forget our most inspirational leader who has come in the conversation as well many times with Allama Iqbal. And I'll just share a few lines in which what he said that rise above the sectional interest and private ambitions. Pass from matter to spirit. Matter is diversity. Spirit is light and life and unity. So, with that said, I thank everybody who had joined us for this session. I thank our guest, Professor Syed Dr. Jafar Ahmed, and Mr. Tweeter Jacobs for enlightening us on this important topic. And we hope that this continue in our ZU dialogues in the future. And we'll bring out more and more content like this with experts and panelists, especially for our young viewers, so that we can take Pakistan to a new standpoint and bring the vision to light of both Jinnah and what Allama Iqbal had envisioned. Thank you so much. Uh,
Thank you.
Thank you.